Welcome back to another episode of Meredyth with a Y. I am your host, Meredyth Willits, and today we have Kate Lowry, CEO coach, venture capitalist, and author of Unbreakable, How to Thrive Under Fear-Based Leaders. From McKinsey to Meta to Insight Partners, Kate has seen firsthand how fear-based leadership takes root and how to rise above it. In this episode, we're going to be talking about staying grounded, leading with courage, and turning even the most toxic environments into opportunities for growth and strength. If you've ever worked under a fear-driven boss or want to lead from confidence instead of control, this conversation is for you. Hello, everyone. This is Meredyth with a Y, and I am your host, Meredyth Willits. Today, we are going to go deep, changing lives, and I am giving you the keys to the castle. Kate, thank you so very much for being here with us today. I appreciate your time.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Awesome. So I have to say, one of the things that I love about your books is, first of all, it's very easy to read. It's very plain English. There's no garble or like over the head speak. It's very, very simple to read. And also, I believe it's incredibly timely. It seems that we've hit a point in, nationally and in the workplace where I think people have lost their way as having the tools to lead the upcoming generations, and the kind of fear-based leadership of the silent generation and the boomers, and maybe even seeping into Gen X, needs to be turned around. So first of all, thank you for a very timely book. So I have to ask, why'd you write it?
It was February of this past year, and I noticed something really strange. Everywhere I went in Silicon Valley, people were saying the same thing. They were going, wow, my boss is so difficult, but every place I go, I'm running into the same problems. I don't know how to deal with it. And then I noticed that my coaching clients and my peers in the space were starting to spin out. Some of them were panicking, freezing, feeling really overwhelmed, kind of noting the sea change that we're seeing across society in how people are leading right now. And when I looked at that, I realized that I was doing totally fine. Well, they were really struggling. And it was at that point I realized that I had a toolkit that they didn't have. And I went, oh
Yeah.
no, I need to find a way to get the right skills in people's hands, because too many people believe fear-based leaders. When a fear-based leader says, you're nothing without me, resistance is futile, you're powerless, you're alone, when actually people are way more powerful than they think. They just need the skills to preserve their own autonomy and agency.
Yeah. I think too, as these generational workers, right? So what would that be? Gen Y, millennials, um, are coming up. I think that they are
Mhm.
starting to realize they don't need to tolerate the same abuse. And so when they enter the workplace, it's like static on their skin, like, especially if they were raised in a non-toxic, non-authoritarian household, and then they get around these bosses who, you know, lead with an iron fist, or they create these weird relationship triangles, or all of the tools that they use. It's And then they say, oh well, they're quitters.
Mhm.
They go through jobs not realizing that maybe that they're the problem. What would you say if you see, as a boss, so let's say high boss, okay, so president of the company,
Mhm.
and you're watching maybe your managers or your vice presidents having a lot of turnover? I've seen companies where you see turnover, entire departments turning over once, twice, three times in a matter of less than maybe 10 years. What would you say to that president when you're seeing that kind of turnover for the vice president departments? What would you say to them? Like, hey, you need to look at this, or what?
Yeah, it's one of those things where there's kind of no smoke without a fire. Um, if you have serious attrition problems, something is wrong with your culture. or compensation. And I think too often leaders get away with it by making excuses. People just don't want to work hard. People don't understand the meaning of work anymore. No one wants to show up and walk uphill in the snow both ways, blah, blah, blah. And so I would challenge, the C-suite of these different companies or even the boards when you have CEOs like this to look past those leaders' excuses and try to figure out, where the actual problems are. Because I think that oftentimes fear-based leaders will show a very different face looking up to people above them. They can be very sycophantic or kind of suck up to their CEO, but then turn around and rage at the people below them. And so leaders need to understand that sometimes the face that they're getting is very different than the face the people below them are getting.
Yeah, and I think turnover is a huge red flag that I don't think enough people look at. And if you have like president, vice president, managers, turnover, like you're saying, what I see often in workplace environments, I don't work there, but I watch this, I talk to people, is they do fire or make excuses for quitting, and then their butt is saved. So, like, it's not me, it was them. I got rid of them or forced them to quit, etc. I did my job, and you know, it kind of the bullet bounces off of them, so to speak. What do you do though? I mean, we're in such a chaotic fear-based employee looking for jobs. I know a lot of people that are very, very qualified who have applied for 400, 800 jobs
Mhm.
legitimately. What would you say to employees out there that are afraid, like, I can't speak up? I don't want to have to be a person that's out there on LinkedIn and, Indeed looking for a job because I spoke up. What do you say to them? How do you without without reading your book, but we can give them a little taste. What do you say to people that come to you and say, "Oh my god, I'm in this completely toxic relationship with my boss," or it's a toxic work environment?
Yeah, I think that sometimes people don't realize that there's a spectrum of resistance. On one end, there's being passive and doing nothing, and on the other end, there's like aggressive confrontation or rage quitting. But in the middle, there is quite a bit of space where you can set boundaries with that difficult person above you, where you can decide how you want to be seen and how you want to play it. Oftentimes, I will tell people to figure out how to be a useful tool in their hierarchy. As long as you're useful and delivering along the lines that someone cares about, they're less likely to target you. You can also embrace being underestimated. Fear-based leaders tend to think everyone else around them is deeply incompetent. And so you can say, "Oh, yes, I'm just so incompetent. I can't figure out any of this. I just don't get it." And then not do the things that they want you to do because they think that you can't do them. And so there's a whole range of behavior kind of in the middle. One of my favorite things to tell people is, keep in mind what information you're sharing because they'll weaponize information against you. Be very mindful of your availability. Availability around them is definitely a form of leverage. And then you need to be thinking really critically about how and when you're giving them attention because leaders like this feed on attention, they feed on reactions. And so you can actually upwardly manage them by controlling how much attention you give them and when, or by being very boring for them to try to get reactions out of. And so I think that there's really a whole library of levers people can pull. They just need to learn to see which levers are there.
The one thing that was making me wacko in the book is I just kept feeling like, just quit. like
Mhm.
like run, like, when do we just say enough is enough and not play the game? Because even inside the game can be toxic, because then you have to leave and know that you've been playing mental gymnastics all day. When you speak about kind of staying in it and using the tools, you're definitely referencing fighting it out, if you will, or muscling through. when When do you say, "Oh my god, I can't anymore. Like this is so toxic. I'm not being true to myself. I'm not winning here. I got to get out of this."
Yeah. So, I might be unique as an author where I would say my tactics in my book are a last resort. If you can leave and find something better, you always should. Like I grew up training in Aikido, which is a martial art that says if someone tries to attack you, the best solution is to run away. You only fight them if you can't run away. And my book is the same thing. However, it was written because, when I started my career, around 3 in 10 leaders I interacted with were like this. So it was actually pretty easy. You could quit and find something different. But in the last 5 years of my career, it's been more like 7 in 10 leaders I encounter are adopting these behaviors. And so this book is written for the moment of what can you do if you can't leave?
Yeah.
But in my case, I've in many cases ended up founding my own companies, because that's one way to truly escape. And I think that's why we see so much solopreneurship in Gen Z and some of the younger generations.
Yeah, totally. I think a lot of leaders look at their fear-based tactics as being like perfectionism, or like I just want it how I want it, period, and this is the way. I'm just asking you to do your job, right? So that it's under the veil of that. But there's so much that's going on under the surface of the way in which they do it. They sidebar one employee, then they work it against another employee, and they're playing all these types of games. What would you say to the leaders that are toxic, that don't maybe even realize they're being toxic, and they're hiding under the veil of perfectionism, or the job just needs to be done?
Yeah, so there's something called other-oriented perfectionism. A lot of people think about perfectionism related to self, but there are people who aggressively micromanage and try to force others to be perfect around them, and that is equally unhealthy. It's a form of control tactics. And so to leaders like that, I would say it's always okay to have high standards. Even with my employees, I have high standards. But if you have an employee who cannot meet those standards, it's your responsibility to support them, help them grow, help them be set up for success so that they are able to flourish and then learn to do the things that you need them to do. A leader's job is to empower their employees, to help them upskill, to help them grow, to help them, be part of a team. And leaders like this bring in, what in couples therapy they call the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, which are things like disdain, contempt, derision. And when you have those things, those are telltale signs in a couple's relationship that there's going to be a breakup. And then you see that in the workplace, that's a sign that either the leader is going to fire someone or that employee is going to quit. And so those types of approaches have no place in relationships with other human beings.
One thing that, like, my husband, he's been vice president, senior vice president at a few different companies, and his goal, which I find so, like, inspirational and especially weird for maybe a Gen Xer, I don't know, but he's always talking about growing his people. And,
Mhm.
like, almost every one of his assistants have gone on to, if not open companies, run companies, become vice presidents themselves. And these were like coordinators, and they've gone on to do great things. And as he moves through different workplaces, he's a consultant now. What he's finding is that fear of growing the people under them, like, so you have a manager and then you've got staff underneath you. It's just this failure to grow people. Do you think that that's like an ego, or a fear based on, I don't want them to take my job or leave, or what is that fear of growing people today that we're seeing, and
You know,
empowering them basically?
it's not necessarily that they wouldn't want people to grow. It's first of all, they think they shouldn't have to. They think everyone around them exists to serve them, not that they exist to serve their people. But secondly, I say that these leaders have really missed a lot of what I call kindergarten lessons.
What is it?
which means kindergarten lessons.
Okay.
Um, they haven't learned how to build trust. They don't know how to inspire followership or even make friends. They don't know how to apologize. They don't know how to express their needs. Often because the environments they grew up in were environments of dominance and fear. And so it's not necessarily that some of them wouldn't want to, it's that they think they shouldn't have to, and they don't actually have the skills they need to get something like that done. Um,
Mm,
so I think something we forget is that these are people who are schoolyard bullies grown up. And schoolyard bullies aren't shown a lot of strong role modeling of how to be something better. And it's possible for people to be 40 years old and have never had someone care for them, look out for their development, or trust them. I was working with a COO in Silicon Valley a couple of weeks ago, and he was like, "Why are you helping me? What's in it for you?" I was like, you know, you're a person who's in distress. You need help. I would help anyone in distress because I care. And he was like, whoa, I don't even know what that is. And so a lot of these people have grown up in kind of emotional deserts.
yeah. Yeah. I think a lot of times people look at life like a pie and there's only so many pieces to go around. And so they have to get theirs. And I think that a lot of times in lower, um, like salespeople or lower level jobs, it is that dog eat dog that does get them to the top, being the best salesperson. That's dog eat dog, or being, whatever it is, working 7 to 7 and just being fearless gets them the promotion because they are putting out the most amount of work. But then that doesn't necessarily mean that they are then going to be good managers. And I know that a lot of people see that the best performer doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be the best manager of humans. What would you say to someone that's looking out at their staff and they've got this top performer over here? They're killing it. Their numbers are good every single month. They're a vicious performer. But then you've got someone over in the middle, but they're really great with humans. What would you say to that manager when they're going to try to, promote someone into a senior salesperson or a manager to manage those salespeople? And then what do you say to your staff when you maybe don't promote the best performer because you know that they're not going to be the best manager? Like that's a tough place.
It is. And I think that this is where, when you look at companies and their learning and development pathways, it makes sense to have parallel tracks for individual contributors and management. It should always be a choice whether someone is a people manager or not, because there are some people that are and they are better off being individual contributors, even if they are very senior. They're not meant to manage people. However, many companies force people into management tracks when that's not something that their hyper individualistic people will ever be good at, but they feel pressured to climb because they're seeking status, they're seeking power, they want the next thing. And so that's where you have to start thinking about system design. In my case, my preference is always to take people who are deeply good, caring, compassionate people and then actively invest and develop them, because I can teach almost any business skill, but I cannot teach people how to care for others. I
Wow.
cannot teach people how to have compassion and patience. And so for people that are having to make these promotion bets, I would say bet on the person who knows how to grow and who knows how to care.
Wow. That's almost like as you're speaking about it, I see kind of like this checklist, if you will, for the vice president or whoever's in charge of the team. Like it's not just about numbers. We also need to see these things: compassion, caring, works well with others, looks out for people, like shares deals if the person's, on vacation or whatever, like an across the board checklist, not necessarily the top performer. And being that top performer, maybe also looking at growing people in places and not just honoring, or because it's always right, it's always the sales contest, right? Whoever sells the most. And we laugh at kind of that participation award or most improved or most caring ball player or whatever, the team player. But as you're speaking about this, I think that it's going to have to have really good managers moving forward. We almost have to make it a well-rounded person, not just the best salesperson, so that the best salesperson realizes it's kind of like when you're in high school, like you might have straight A's, but did you volunteer? Were you an athlete? Did you do any clubs? Like you can't just have straight A's. You have to be a well-rounded person. And it's funny that as we're having this conversation, that's kind of the last time, maybe that those things are looked at as important. It's kind of like after high school, it's just like grades, 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 grades. Maybe going into law school. Were you on any of these boards, or, were you whatever, worked on this board or that board as going into law school? But it's interesting that after high school, we stop looking at well-rounded individuals as being leaders or high achievers. I've never looked at it that way. So I love that.
Yeah, for sure. A lot of people have very deep-seated insecurities, especially fear-based leaders. And so when they get out of college, people who feel like they are not enough start chasing societal success metrics, which for them is often big titles, lots of money, all of this, the trappings, the shiny trappings of success. And I don't think that's the right way to define success. For me, if I'm successful, it means that I'm living every day in accordance with my values and I like who I am.
Yeah.
And I think if more people were given that definition of success, they would make some pretty different choices, right? Because it's one thing to seek power because you want a title. It's another thing to seek power because you want to make the world a better place, because you want to protect people who need protection. Because in my experience, the best leaders are often the folks who are good at it, but they don't necessarily want it. They don't necessarily need it.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, when you were just talking right there, I'm like imagining myself as this normal fear-based leader. And I'm reading your book or I'm listening to this podcast. Maybe even my boss has said, bro, sis, you gotta make nice with your staff. And like this feeling of blockage between me and the staff and wanting to like reach out, like I could feel it in my throat and in my chest of like, but then they'll think I'm weak. If I ask their opinion, if I ask what I could do better, like all those things that I know, we're dealing with this societally between generations, between parents and children. We're seeing a lot of adult children going no contact with parents who refuse to apologize. Like you said at the top, they don't apologize. They don't say, I'm sorry, I did something wrong. Or yes, I made some mistakes raising you by either physical abuse or verbal abuse or whatever the thing is. There definitely is a block. I can feel it as I'm pretending to be a boss, leaning into my staff. Um, and I think that that's a generational thing of, empathy is weakness, that whole psychology. What would you say to that person that can't apologize or can't kind of put a hand out to their staff and sit down and say, all right, what am I doing wrong here? Because this isn't going smoothly.
Yeah, I think that some older generations and some people in these generations are stuck in a very outdated notion of strength. It's a very black and white definition of strength, where they're saying, I'm either 100% good or 100% bad, and there's no in between. And if you say I did one thing wrong, then, my canvas of self flips from all good to all bad immediately.
Yeah.
And so for people like that, they literally cannot tolerate the idea that they may have erred. And so to them, I would say true strength is being vulnerable. True strength is admitting you don't know everything. I say to my direct reports all the time, I don't know most things about most things. I never will, right? There's so much to know in the world and it's changing all the time. And I make mistakes all the time. And, every person on my team needs a different management style. And sometimes I forget to switch one style going from person to another. And um, people don't like it, and then I have to say, hey, I'm sorry, let's fix this, let's repair it together, because real leaders know that it is not me versus you. Emotionally immature people get stuck in power struggles. The real leadership mindset is us versus problem, right?
I love that.
And so, um, for folks that get trapped in me versus you, I would say, hey, it's okay that you got bogged down in this. Let's take a step back. What's the real problem here? How can we work together to solve it? Um, and and approaching them from a place of neutrality, I think, is really important.
It was funny when you were started to talk to your staff and you were saying, I don't know everything. Like I make mistakes. Like the energy inside of me was so like lifted up. And I was like, yay, I get to talk about this and I get to share and I'm a part of a team. Like instantly my energy was like invigorated as you were saying those things, me being part of your team. One time I worked for this law firm and I was invited to a meeting, and it was a bunch of like paralegals and secretaries and all that stuff. And the I guess it would be the office manager, she was there, and I raised my hand and I said something, and she literally looked at me and she goes, you just need to be quiet, you're not ready to participate in this meeting. And I shut down and I was like, I hate everyone, I hate all of you. Like I went back to my desk, I'm like, this is, why would you invite me? Like I was so angry. And it was just like she put her paw right on top of me and it was like bam, like I don't want to hear from you. And it just shuts you down. Like, I think people want to bring ideas, but they don't want to feel stupid. And if they have a boss that is, like you're saying, black or white, there's no gray. And I think that that comes from like when I look at it with parents or, familiar relationships, I think it boils down to if I'm wrong, then I'm bad, and all the shame around that. Because there was, the boomers and the Gen X as we grew up, it's like you're either, like you said, you're either good or bad, and you align yourself. And so if you align yourself with, I'm a good boss, and my dad and I always talk about it, like when people get paid a lot of money, they think they know the answers to everything. And so there's that ego attachment too. And so if you come at them, these leaders, and you chink their armor, you put a dent in it, um, they don't know how to deal with that ego blow. Like I've aligned myself with this. This is the way that I am. How dare you tell me something other than that? And now I'm going to fall apart and be angry. What do you see? Because in your coaching practice, when you're dealing with people that can only see black and white.
Yeah, so I think what I often have to work on with them is helping shore up their sense of self. A lot of these people don't really know who they are. They just know the societal roles they've been told to play. And they're very deeply sensitive about these roles. And so, what I do with my clients is model being a safe attachment figure and give them a safe space where they're allowed to not know things, where they're allowed to be unsure, where they're allowed to ask for help, and I help them very slowly start to build trust, right? You can tell me anything, I will not judge you, right? And it's only when leaders have safe spaces like that in their life that they start to learn how they can do that for others. Because if you don't have anyone that you trust, you're not going to trust your employees. If you don't like yourself, it's very hard for you to like other people. And so I think whether it's with me as a coach or someone else, every leader needs at least one person in their life who is an objective sounding board that has no vested interest in the outcome. Because I think that a lot of people don't realize how fraught being a leader is. You know, pretty much every choice you make, and you may be making 20 choices an hour, makes at least one person mad. And so many leaders, rather than dealing with that blowback or saying, yes, it's part of my job, it's responsibility that I'm going to make choices that have trade offs, they shut down and they say, well, if you don't like it, get out, because they're just so tired of having to deal with the humanity of it all. And I think that's partly why leaders who don't have the interpersonal skills they need start trying to rule with an iron fist, because it's really overwhelming to them. They don't know how to deal.
Yeah, it's their way or the highway, and then they don't have to deal, honestly. I
Right.
mean,
Right.
there's no
Um,
dealing. What do you say to, like, somebody who finds themselves feeling combative when what they are saying is proven to be a proven method of success, and they have people that aren't buying in, and that person is just so, like, frustrated all the time because people aren't buying in? How do you get people to buy in when you do have a tried and true thing and the other people just kind of don't want to do it or don't want to work, I guess?
yeah, so I would tell you, what I would tell anyone who's trying to sell or influence related to anything, sales starts with listening, right? If people aren't buying into something that you're trying to push, you need to be asking them, what's important to you right now? What's hard for you right now? And then start framing what you're pitching in terms of what incentivizes them. Whether
Okay.
you're a CEO trying to appeal to your most junior level analysts, or whether you're an analyst trying to get a CEO to pick up your idea for a new product, it all starts by taking the time to understand what's motivating the people around you and getting curious rather than saying, they don't like my thing, they should just go away. Say, they don't like my thing. That's really interesting. What don't they like about it? What would they want to do instead? What's top of mind for them right now? And why is what I'm trying to teach them or give them, why is that, not something that they're interested in, you know?
Yeah. I'm finding that right now, because there's been such a shift, just like energetically, globally, post pandemic, post COVID, I'm definitely seeing a shift where we're seeing, because this is the way we've always done it, and that's what they say, and really wanting to try new things. Are you seeing the we've always done it this way, and people wanting to breathe new life into organizations? Are you seeing that as well?
I think right now it really depends on the industry. People respond to change in different ways. And right now, there's a lot of macroeconomic volatility, a lot of systemic change happening. We're seeing this type of leadership style sweep across, private, social, public sector, all at the same time. And so, what I am noticing is that people are removing the psychological safety required to innovate. Um,
Mm,
and so we're getting a lot of CEOs who are saying, I'm the only innovator at the company. I'm going to have all the best ideas. I want to build a rocket. I want to make a car. I want to do all these different things. Go make that happen. And that's not where the best innovation comes from. Innovation comes from people who are close to pain points, noticing problems and designing special solutions to fix them. So I think that that is a problem. But the industries where I tend to see the most I'm doubling down, no change allowed, tend to be things like nonprofits, academia, places where there are often very long tenures of leaders who got to where they are by focusing on very narrow and deep topics. And I'm seeing people in tech wanting to breathe in new life, but being very clumsy and not knowing how to do it. So I wouldn't
yeah.
recommend either approach.
Yeah. I also, I see people, and I think that this is just runs rampant, unfortunately, more often than we would like, obviously. But where, you bring an idea to a boss and they might be like, poo poo the idea, or I'll think about it. And then they turn around and present it as their own idea. What do you say to the person whose idea it was? How do you handle that type of situation? I know this is actually very prevalent, and I know a lot of people that don't know what to do in that situation. Like, dude just stole my whole idea and presented it as theirs. Now, do I embarrass them? Do I say, wow, you must have really liked that when I brought it to you? What do you do in that type of situation?
Yeah, so, I typically recommend, like, the most emotionally mature paths possible. So if something is really bothering you, you never want to bring it up to a leader in front of other people. You don't want them to feel shamed or like you're calling them out in front of other people whose opinions they care about. So I would say grab them, even if it's 10 minutes in a hallway, and then use a best practice communication framework. I teach several communication frameworks in my practice, but one that's very common is called DEAR. So it's describe, express, assert, reinforce. And so that's where you use a very neutral language. So you wouldn't say, you're an asshole because you stole my idea and I'm so mad and I'm going to quit. You might say, hey, I noticed you ended up using my idea in that meeting. I really felt left out because I noticed you didn't credit me. I would really appreciate it if in the future, you could give me a shout out because I can tell you really appreciate my work and I'd like to know that I'm appreciated. So, if you could do that, it would really make a big difference for me.
Yeah.
And that's the type of mature, direct communication that can lead to dialogue. Because if you come in accusing, the other side will get defensive and shut down. And if you come in and not say anything, you will feel shut down.
Yeah.
But with fear based leaders, you have to really decide using what I call breadcrumbing whether they're capable of having any type of dialogue. Some of them are not capable of mature engagement. Um, and so then you kind of have to go down a different path.
I see now we have so much education around the things that people get sued for.
Mm,
Before before now, it was obviously DEI was super important. Then there was, there's been, sex discrimination, sexual harassment. There's a lot of education in companies about that
mhm.
because you could get sued for it,
Yes.
right? And that was the premise. Like, don't do these things. We don't want to get sued. Now you've been told, hands off, right? Because you can't be sued maybe for being emotionally immature and a bad leader, you could be sued for hostile work environment. Although now I don't know if you can be sued for anything at this point. Um, but when do you think companies are going to wake up and realize that emotional intelligence is going to drive their business, their bottom line, their productivity through the roof more than anything? I mean, obviously, we don't want a hostile or unequal work environment or a sexist, sexually negative work environment. But I'm just saying, when are companies going to realize that being emotionally intelligent is profoundly huge when it comes to their bottom line and productivity?
It's funny, they're always very careful to tell you what not to do, but they rarely tell you what you should do. Um, and it's what you should do that makes a huge difference in the bottom line. If you have leaders who can communicate maturely, who make people feel cared for, where everyone in the company understands what they're doing, why they're doing it, and how it supports a mission, those teams are going to run to the ends of the earth with you. And you lose more money in turnover than you do in lawsuits. So it's something that I really think people should invest more in. The problem is that if they teach people how to be emotionally intelligent and communicate maturely, then they know that the staff are going to be able to see and call out when the leaders don't do that. And
Yeah.
so A lot of fear-based leaders don't want to cultivate awareness in their staff because they actually want their staff not to work as a team. They want them to be easy to control, which means they encourage infighting, chaos, destabilization. They kind of want their teams limping along so that people feel like they can't leave, but they also don't want to stay because they're preserving their audience, they're preserving their source of attention. And that's a
So
very
wild.
different way to think about things.
Yeah, and my husband worked for a guy who literally would cause infighting. It was the weirdest thing I have ever seen. He literally fed off of departments fighting with each other, and we were just blown away. Like, why would you do this? It stagnates so much progress.
Yeah,
So it makes everyone sick to their stomach, and everyone's, but interesting as I'm even saying this, it does create a suck up environment where everybody's trying to get to the main guy to plead their case. And like you're saying, it does afford that one leader a lot of attention because everyone's vying for his attention while they're all backfighting over here. And it makes sense that it cements his leadership role because everyone's fighting for his attention.
definitely. When people are fighting with each other, what can't they do? They can't gang up on you. They can't take over your power as a fear-based leader. And so a lot of them encourage infighting, or they are deliberately poor communicators where they'll give one piece of the ecosystem information and not the other pieces. And um, they don't tell anyone what the big major plan is because as long as they don't tell people, they're the sole source of truth in the ecosystem. And that makes them super important and it puts them on a pedestal, and everyone has to come to them to figure out what's going on. And so that's unfortunate. And it's not how good teams run, but it is
Yeah.
how those organizations run. And in the end, it usually catches up with them. But sometimes it takes a very long time. A lot of these people are deeply insulated by their own wealth and power.
Yeah. Gosh, that's so good. It's so true. When we're living it every single day with, the infighting and not knowing. I think like as I'm talking to you, it's like I just keep seeing in my head all these people maybe looking towards military leadership and being like, okay, I'm the one and only. I'm going to scare the hell out of you. I'm going to scream in your face. You're going to follow me blindly. And in certain circumstances, like the military, maybe that works. However, if you take the military and put them in actually a fighting scenario where they're actually in the moment of war, it does kind of all level out where everybody's helping each other out. And although there is a hierarchy in military, when you're in the fight, right? When you're in the everyday of the fight, it does shift. And I don't think people maybe are recognizing that shift. Even though there is a leader, there has to be a continuity of care and concern amongst everybody all at the same time, looking out for each other and not just everybody staring at the leader and shooting at each other. And I think that that's maybe where people are missing the let's do it like the military because they'll follow you to the ends of earth. I think that they're missing what the reason is for that.
Yeah, so military is super interesting because it's a deeply hierarchical environment. But I think that people often forget that structure, power, hierarchy are all morally neutral. It's about how they're used. So, in a wartime situation, having hierarchy and very clear role definition in the military means people know who does what when, and that can be really helpful. But fear-based leaders, when they see something like the military, they see an appeal of force, an appeal of power that is not protective, right? The Department of Defense is a defense department typically. It's about preventing conflict. That's
Yeah.
why we have foreign aid and things like that. And so fear based leaders look at militaries, and rather than seeing a protective entity that prevents conflict, they think of something that can further conflict, that can
Yeah.
frighten with force, that can overpower with force. And so, um, it's a kind of a troubling time where, a lot of people in power, whether that's in business or public sector or social sector, um, a lot of people have keys to cars you wouldn't want them to have right now.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely an interest. And honestly, when I started reading your book, outside of your bio that you sent over, I was like, oh, okay, we're gonna we're gonna talk about fear-based leaders. And I mean, we're seeing it in the government, no matter what side of the aisle you're
Right.
on, you can clearly watch if you don't follow everything I say, you're getting fired. If you don't agree with me, if you don't sign a loyalty pledge, you're getting fired. And I always think my dad and I talk about Lincoln and how when he became president, he surrounded himself with people that did not agree with him to hold his feet to the fire and challenge his every thought, his every action. And I'm fascinated by Lincoln for that way of existing as a president of the United States, wherein now it's everybody has to agree, and I don't know how well that's working out. So when I got your when I got your book in the mail, I'm like, okay, this is going to be interesting. But honestly, it does lend to understanding what is happening in government
Yeah.
because of fear based leadership. And so the interesting thing about this book, and I always say what you can make small, you can make big. What is big, you can make small, and then you can understand it better if it
Mhm.
seems too large. Is that this book is beautiful for being a parent. It's good for being a child, an adult child of fear based parents. It's good
Right.
for um, leaders of businesses. It's good for people who are employees of businesses. It's good for understanding our government. It's good for understanding any situation where you have any sort of hierarchy where it's not going well, that it might be leaning into
Yeah.
toxic and how to deal with it. It does not matter. This does not have to be a book that you read only, oh, I'm an employee and I need to how to deal with my boss. Oh, no, 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 no. And where I come from, which is more of a spiritual kind of curious person, I look at these things and I say, if you have found yourself in a position at work where you are dealing with a fear based personality, fear based leader, there is a 100% chance that you are dealing with that in another relationship in your life. And
Yeah,
you have
it
been
is.
given this opportunity to work through it. And if you are a fear-based leader, I promise you that you are acting that way somewhere else in your life, and your job is just giving you an opportunity to change those behaviors. Am I right?
Yeah, because, I chose business examples to include in the book because they were the most neutral. When I
Yeah.
included examples about government, it could feel polarizing. If I included things about families, some people feel attacked based on their family dynamics. And so I kept the book as neutral as I could to make sure, it wouldn't get censored or things like that. But really, it's about any place where power dynamics are being abused.
Yeah.
And people who abuse power dynamics at work abuse them at home. You see fear-based leaders in churches, in governments, in families, in businesses. Any place where folks have power over someone else, there's usually folks who are just saying, "Ooh, power, yum, I like that. I'm going to take advantage of others." And so, if I could give every federal employee a copy of this book, I would. If I could give tech workers copies of this book, I also would, because what's happening with this trend is it's not isolated. It's in our TV shows, Game of Thrones, House of Cards, Billions, Succession. They all have fear-based leaders. It's in tech with Mark Zuckerberg and Elon. It's in government with Andrew Cuomo and JD Vance and all these different people. And I think that for a lot of people, it's really causing deep fear, deep consternation. And I want to be able to say to them, hey, I have been around these types of difficult assholes my entire life, and I've
Yeah.
managed to have a very good life. And so you can too, but you have to learn the skills to protect yourself and the people that you care about. And so this book is kind of my tactical guide where it's meant to feel like I'm sitting across the table in a coffee shop and a friend is helping you figure out how to deal with, bad people or assholes.
Yeah. Yeah, literally. I think it's a brilliant book. Again, it's so easy to read. You break it down beautifully chapter by chapter. You give, very real world examples, which I love. One of my most important books I've ever read in my life is Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents. 53
Yeah.
years, most important book I've ever read, because it gives real world examples and you go, oh, I do this. And it helped me up to parents. It helped me down to being a parent to my children. And I
Mhm.
think that this book is a perfect example that, like you said, is kind of like wiggles on neutral, so that you can also use the examples in any aspect of your life. It does not just have to be work. You could use these exact same tools with, parents that are, overbearing or controlling or fear-based, whatever. And I think that it really does help to understand what's going on in our government right now, where fear is what they're selling. And so I really appreciate
Yeah.
you writing this, because it's definitely helped me to be, I guess, a little bit more empowered and understand things across the board. And also as a parent, it helps me, like what you said with your question, like what's the hardest thing you're going through right now, or what's scary to you that you don't want to do your homework, or like why is it so difficult for you to clean your room. So as a parent, it even gives it, helpful tips to how to lead inside of your own household, where it is easy to say, because I said so, because I'm the
Mhm.
mom, because you're going to be grounded, because we do use those tactics. And in your book, it describes how we don't necessarily, as parents, as leaders, as bosses, we don't necessarily have to deal in fear-based tactics. So, Kate, thank you so very much for being here today and sharing your incredible amount of knowledge about leadership and tools and all the things that create a more workable, productive environment, no matter what that environment is. But everybody check it out. Amazon, all the good bookstores, everything like that. Unbreakable, How to Thrive Under Fear-Based Leaders by Kate Lowry. And you will not be disappointed. You'll use this in every facet of your life. Again, super easy to read. But thank you so much for being here today. I so appreciate you.
Oh, my pleasure. I mean, I will do everything in my power to make sure everyone who needs anything in this book gets it. So thank you for having me, and thank you for a good conversation.
You're the best. Thanks so much. All right, guys, I'll see everybody here next week. And until then, have a good one. Bye. Thanks for listening. If you would like to connect on a more personal level, head over to meredythwillits.com or on Instagram at Meredyth with a Y for behind-the-scene footage and outtakes. Please subscribe and come back each week for more Meredyth with a Y. Thanks again for listening.